Yeah, thank you.
So welcome everybody who has joined us. If there's any, if we get booted out of the Zoom, again, we will just pick up where we left off. There's a lot to talk about today. We're basically focused on beginning agriculture. Just so we'll be focused on some real basic factors, as well as I will give you a pretty thorough introduction to my farm and our website, northslopefarm.com. And I want to encourage everybody to use the chat option, because we are going to cover a lot of territory today. And I'm going to have to click around a fair amount. So you may see an image that you want to go back to. So if you see an image that you want to go back to or talk more about, feel free to drop it in the chat as you see it. And we'll see if we can't get back to it at the end. Like I say, I'm going to cover a lot of territory. I'm going to be clicking through a lot of different screens. For the most part, if there's something I really want you to see that's hard to see, I'll be sure to hold it there for time. First and foremost, Mike Rassweiler, North Slope Farm. We're located in southern Hunterdon County. 1995, I guess that was our first season of production. And I think around 1997, we first got certified organic. And I guess at that point it was, well, actually we had passed our 3-year resting period between conventional and when you would be able to certify organic. There's a resource here that I want to, I'm going to start the talk with giving you some direction to resources that I would like you to be able to use in the future. So the simplest resource is where we're going to start, which is northslopefarm.com, which is our website. And basically, in 2006, I officially started a farmer training program, and that farmer training program ran for 10 years. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but the relevant piece is that a big part of the training program was to have the trainees post information. This was for two things. One was to teach them how to look back at farm records and use those farm records to derive an understanding of what happened before they came. So they had to use the farm records from the year previous to post monthly summaries. So again, directing you to resources, if you look on I think the right side of your screen, you'll see a list of categories, starting with category posting, community affairs. So in preparation for today's talk, I made every effort to try to put my references under the reference category, but for some reason I wasn't able to. So events and workshops, we'll click there. And we've got links to organic and agricultural information. This is all for you guys today related to this topic. So I'm going to click on that link. And basically what I did is I gave you links to some top sources for information about organic management practices, as well as basic farm information. We can go back to these towards the end, but I'm just going to read them off. Rodale Institute is definitely the starting place for learning about organic practices, talking about regenerative agriculture. And one of the most impressive things about the Rodale Institute is they've maintained a long-term farming systems trial to demonstrate that organic management practices are equal, maybe better, than what is commonly referred to as conventional practices. The Natural Resource Conservation Service is basically, as a starting farmer, this is USDA, United States Department of Agriculture resource for you. They will help you with understanding soil erosion. They'll help you get access to programs that will help you do all sorts of cost-shared practices. Really important organization, and their national website has a really good job with organic management practices, understanding it, how to implement them. Also want to introduce NOFA New Jersey. I'm the board president of NOFA New Jersey, and really our organization is all about trying to connect our community and support the farming, gardening, foodie community who are interested in health, ecology. Organic practices tie us together. Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Under the Rutgers Cooperative Extension, the Plant and Pest Advisory, an incredible tool for any farmer who wants to have maintain connection to the commercial information available about pests and your risk to exposure to pests and diseases and funguses. Definitely all these links I'd encourage you to check out. The New Jersey Vegetable Growers Guide has detailed information about growing different vegetable crops. We'll get into the details there a little bit. For instance, they have recommendations about how much fertilizer to use for the different crops. And hopefully if we get there, I'll show you the resource for doing that calculation. Delaware Valley University. I can't say enough about a university that has dedicated itself to putting organic programming in their curriculum, and definitely worth checking out. Penn State Extension has a good website, and Cornell University has been investing in research into compost for probably decades, maybe. Really good information. All right, so we're on links. In this category, getting back to North Slope Farm a little bit, under the training links, basically are a list of what I refer to as the elements of our operation. So farming is a collection of very simple tasks. The challenge becomes that you have to manage all these different tasks. And in particular, the small scale farmer who's operating by themselves without any corporate support or generational wisdom has to be able to manage all these different elements. Even though they've got simple tasks, it is enough to trip anyone up. So administration, composting, crop care, equipment, greenhouses, handling, infrastructure, planting, marketing, all these things you have to be an expert in. And that's a challenge. So as a farmer, you have to figure out what you can do best and figure out what you can hire to have somebody take responsibility for. And what we found at North Slope Farm was that we spent a lot of time training every worker who came to our farm. Because as we'll get into the profitability, I'm just going to click on the training link just to give you an idea. Let's see if we can find it. So one thing about if you're going to the, I'm not going to find it. If you're using the northslopefarm.com website as a resource or an inspiration, if you click on one of these categories, they're posted from the oldest originating posts will be at the bottom. So you have to scroll way down, and the most recent things will be at the top. Let's see. So to jump around a little bit, so the two most interesting things for you as beginning farmers are going to be the season summaries and the monthly summaries. So I'm just going to start with the monthly summary real quick, because basically that was the primary thing for, well, here's an introduction, maybe that'll give you good information. The trainee, every month, we published a monthly summary. And so what the trainee had to do was they had to pull resources, they had to pull information, records related to all the elements of the operation and post a summary of what that month was like last year. So say here we are going into April, the trainee would have to post a summary of April from the previous year. And one of the things, well, a couple of the things we focused on was how many hours were invested in each of the elements of operation. What was our, what were the planting records? What were the things we planted? How much did we harvest? What was the weather like? And what were people doing in all the different elements? Okay, struggling here. I've got my little toolbars blocking my arrows. Okay. So let's see if we go back to March. Let's see if we can get there. Or April, how about that? So say April's coming up and you want to get a sense of what to expect. General observations, equipment, 16 hours, administration, 69 hours, infrastructure, 189 hours. So obviously we're working on some big projects. Greenhouse, 300 hours in that month. It makes sense, you know, here we are, April, we're in there. So you get a sense of what I'm talking about there as far as the resource there. So the idea was, when you have somebody new coming into agriculture, you want to give them a way to see what happened before. Because what always happens on a farm is you start getting overwhelmed. You start feeling like, oh my God, everything is going crazy. This isn't working. That's not working. I'm stressed out about that. And what we found was when we read the postings from the year previous and the year previous to that, and even the year previous to that, it was like, wow, we went through all this is all the same. And it was really the most effective way of calming down the stress. So this is a big reason why we published this and why we tried to keep it updated. One, so that each new farmer would have the opportunity to express themselves, even though they're talking about experiences that others have had. And then also just so that we could see what was happening before, so we could be reassured. The other big thing is the season summary. And I'm going to use the season summary to talk a little bit about one of the big critical pieces of understanding agriculture, which is profitability. So the season summaries, each year we would post a harvest and yield summary, an element hours summary, and a profit and loss summary. So we will go back to that, but I'm going to start with the beginning of our operation, because that's most relevant, I think, to those of you who are just getting started in farming. So all the way, I went to the last entry. We're going to look at this one. Something you should know about when you're navigating around the North Slope Farm website is, for the most part, if you click on an image, it's going to redirect you to a Flickr photo sharing website. When we set this up, the idea was that it was the best way to store images without taking up too much space on our actual website, and that it would be accessible to the public. At this point, I don't know. I think there may be a firewall that you have to join as a member to see the photos. If so, I apologize for that. But most of our photos are stored on that Flickr photo sharing page. So basically what we're looking at here is a spreadsheet from 1995 to 2000. This was our first 5 years of business. The first year, 1995, we had a total income of $5,700. That was from one farmer's market that I was going to once a week. Our total expenses, $2,700. So we had an overall profit of, call it $3,000. So that overall profit is in the way that we've represented our financial spreadsheets throughout the website. That profit is the farmer's wage. All right, so we're not representing, there will be wages represented in the spreadsheet, but the farmer's wage is represented as, do you have a profit or a loss? Our business plan was, in 5 years, we wanted to be profitable. And then that profit at the end of 5 years, our expectation was that if we got there, if we were profitable in 5 years, then we would be able to sustain and grow from there. So what I'm going to share with you today is basically my experience farming since 1995 at North Slope Farm. We've been through a lot of different changes over the years. We're in a very different place. Well, actually, I'll stop there. So the interesting thing in this spreadsheet is in 1999, we really had our best year. And maybe it's the best year I ever had farming. And you can see, that at the bottom, that $38,000 farmer profit, that would be desirable as a small scale farmer in New Jersey to make $38,000 at the end of the year. That's kind of minimum. That's what you need to make or more. That was on a total income of $140,000 gross. Wages, you can see we're only $37,000 at that point. So one of the biggest challenges that I think farmers are facing these days is the cost of labor is really going up much higher than the value of our product. And this has always been the challenge, is how do you get the farmer to charge enough for their product so that they can make a profit? And how do you, and that's really what it comes down to. And so my premise for the training was that it was critical that every farmer that we trained understand the true cost of doing business. We focused on the time that it takes to do the different tasks. We focused on the value of our products. And so every time we were harvesting, every day we were harvesting, we always talked about, like, what is the rate that we need to be harvesting this product at? If we're going to make a profit from this product, how much do we have to harvest in the hour that we're going to spend harvesting it? So we've got 6 people harvesting salad mix. We've got 10 crops to harvest this morning. We've got an hour to harvest a salad mix. And In that time, we're going to establish a certain amount of cost that's been applied to it, mostly labor in the harvesting and the handling. So all that stuff a farmer needs to be very aware of, paying close attention to. And that's one of the things we're going to focus on today. So I'm just looking, I don't see nothing's happening in the chat. So we'll just keep rolling. Profitability. Okay, so in '99, when I was looking at that, we had been through 1, 2, 3, 4. This was our 5th year. We were profitable, but I was concerned that that profit was not enough to justify our business plan. And now I'm trying to think, how am I going to get back to my website? There we go. So under administration in the categories, I posted a letter, which I encourage you all to read when you have a little time. Stewardship capital. So I apologize, it's not that easy to see this screen, probably this letter, but basically the stewardship capital letter is a statement of sort of business understanding, which is to say that the challenge that we faced to achieve a profit in 5 years highlighted the real challenges, not least of which is the cost of buying the land, and then the costs that would be associated with paying back our mortgage, the money that we didn't earn in the years that we didn't make a profit. And really what it came down to is for agriculture in New Jersey to succeed in these modern days, there needs to be a real understanding from the community and corporate investors that we need to support farmers. We need to figure out how to support the small scale individual operator. Now, many people, myself included, got into agriculture with a fair amount of financial resources behind me. So I was able to buy the land without taking on debt. And I was able to get through years without income because I had other sources of income. So this is, that's a great way to go. But it's right now what we're looking at is a real shortage of farmers. And there's not a shortage of people who would be interested to farm. It's more that there's a shortage of opportunity for those people to take the risk to get into agriculture. They need to access the land. And then they need to have some security to deal with the years that they are not making a profit. And this has been the fact that we don't really have that, although the Food Shed Alliance has really stepped up to the front of the New Jersey community by identifying land that they can preserve and make accessible to farmers. And this is just exactly what I'm talking about. That's the kind of thing that has to happen. We have to have the community work together to be able to secure and protect agricultural assets, and then set up systems whereby small-scale farmers can access them as a beginning point, really. So one of the things I'm afraid about today is getting lost in the weeds, and I feel like I'm going there a little bit, so I will try to just keep moving. So I think I've made that point that the challenge of profitability is a big one. So do you even really want to start this farm business? We're going to assume that the answer is yes. You do want to start a farm business, whether you've got access to land right now, whether you have a vision where you're going to be able to get access to land. And so what our objective today is to go through some of the practices that you're going to need to be familiar with so that you can be successful. And then we're going to I'm going to share with you the evolution of my thinking, which has developed practices which hopefully are regenerative. So we'll go there. As a launch, to start there, basically at the end of the training program in 2016, we did an assessment, reassessed the farm plan. And the assessment is that on our typical gross income of around $70,000, which was once through the training program, when I was looking through these numbers last night, again, if you go to season summary in the category list, you can scroll through years and years of financial data. For the most part, we were generating around $70,000. The rule of thumb for commercial agriculture from when I started, and I'm sure the number is a little better now, higher now, but the rule of thumb was you really have to get over like $250,000 gross income to be able to accommodate all the set costs that you have to manage. So set costs are going to be wages, insurance, utilities, taxes, your seed costs, your fuel costs, your fertilizer costs. All those things you can't get away from them. They're always going to be there. So to be able to have an operation that's going to generate enough income that you're going to have cash, a livable salary at the end of the year, you're really looking at needing to set a goal of around $250,000 gross. In 2016, we were looking at, all right, we're going to need to be able to pay our workers that we're working with at this point. We need to generate an extra $30,000 or $40,000 to our gross. And it was like, that's going to be really hard to do. And all we have to work with is to focus on what crops are we having success with right now? What are the crops that we could grow more of? And really that kind of came down to, okay, backing up, what are the crops that we've had success with? Meaning they grow well and we sell out of them. So if they grow well and we could grow more and we sell out of them, meaning we could sell more, that's really what we got to focus on. So we were looking at herbs, blackberries, strawberries, Asian pears, apples and peaches we haven't had any luck with, really. Green beans we have. Tomatoes. Tomatoes are a challenge. I always struggled with wanting them to be, a focus crop because everybody grows them. But in the end, they really do, if you have a market for them, they really do generate a lot of cash. They did generate a lot of cash. Flowers, cut flowers, were a product for us that we have really focused on in the last few years. In fact, I've sort of transitioned away from the vegetables. The flowers are really our primary crop right now. Specialty herbs, and we'll talk about hemp and hazelnuts at the end of the presentation today. Long-term, invest in production systems to increase production. So invest in production systems. This is what a farmer needs to do to move ahead. And this is one of the greatest challenges for a small-scale farmer. It's like, you bought the land, you've got 2 years where you're not going to make any income. You don't really have a whole lot of money to invest. So as a society and a community in New Jersey, we really need to come up with strategies with how do we support farmers in this. Some of you may have heard that the Secretary of Agriculture for New Jersey is retiring his position and moving on. So New Jersey's this year 2023, we need to find a new Secretary of Agriculture. And I want to say we need to find a Secretary of Agriculture who is going to be looking at how do we help farmers invest in production systems to increase production? How do we find a Secretary of Agriculture who's going to support organic management practices, who's going to support regenerative practices, building our soil health, building our potential to provide food for our communities, locally grown, because that has really not been a priority, I'm sorry to say. And I'd really love to see it be a priority. So things like beginning farmer meetings, sharing information, Food Shed Alliance, making opportunities available for farmers. These are the things we need to see more of. All right, so with that, maybe let's jump right into our standard operating procedures. So, Hunterdon County, Certified Organic Training Program, Retail Marketing, Fresh Produce, Flowers, and Herbs. Farming is hard enough. Seek to repeat the things that work, using the tools we have, following patterns that have served us well for years. So this is where you hear about multi-generational farms being successful, because you have that history of doing the practice over and over again. And each time you do the same practice, you do it better. You refine it, you learn time after time, okay, trying to do the seeding right after the rain, the machine gets gummed up and it's just not worth it. It's just worth waiting another day. And then the seeding gets done that much more efficiently, and you just move on to the next task that much easier. So standard operating procedures for farming. This is what the new farmer needs to learn. What are your basic practices? We're going to go through pretty quickly some slides of different equipment. And this is, again, this is sort of a starting point of basic information. We will be talking about improvements on these systems. This is the moldboard plow. This is the plow that caused all the problems in the Dust Bowl, where the ability to drag these suckers through the fields behind tractors over massive areas was just so exciting, because farming is all about getting seeds in the ground. And the only way you can get seeds in the ground is you got to get the ground ready for the seeds. The seeds have to be, that you can't just scatter seeds onto sod and hope to get a viable crop. So what you do is you use the plow to turn the soil over. Now, these photos aren't that great an example of the best use of a moldboard plow. I didn't have a history in agriculture. I didn't grow up on a farm, and the moldboard plow was something I conceived of as farming. This is farming. So I started there and didn't really have a great understanding of managing equipment, the tractor. Like, for instance, one of my big lessons with the tractor was I was always limited by my 50 horsepower John Deere tractor overheating. And it was like, oh, geez, I can't even plow a full field. And it wasn't till years into my career that a mechanic was like, dude, your radiator is just packed with dust and dirt and debris. And so we really did a good thorough cleaning on that radiator, and I haven't had a trouble with the tractor overheating since then. And so I'm able to do this field work much more effectively. The moldboard plow here has, I could have probably been driving faster and maybe spacing them, spacing each pass out a little further. Rolling to compress clods. You see that machine that is attached behind the tractor. Basically, it's a very heavy roller that will press the sod or the clods down, which will make it easier for the cut harrow to drag through the soil. And you see how, this field, that brown soil that you're looking at, was originally sod. It was flipped over by the moldboard plow, pressed down and let sit for 2 weeks. And then we start breaking it down with the cut harrow. This is a case where the cut harrow is being used to renovate a field that's not got a lot of cover. It's not got sod on it. And, so once you get your sod turned over and you've got your field getting worked, then the intensity of the equipment can be reduced. This is a case where for a small scale beginning farmer, the heavy equipment that is sometimes associated with agriculture might be a thing that could be rented. Again, this is a place where corporate America, nonprofits, government can help small scale farmers by making some of this equipment available to them for the short period of time that they actually need it. And then you can, once you get your fields in operation, then you can just maintain them with lighter weight. So this is a field that doesn't have too much cover. A couple light passes with this cut harrow is going to knock back the weeds that are germinating and keep the land available. We've got fairly poorly drained soil, so we use chisel plow. We've gotten away from the moldboard plow, and if we need to bring a field into production, we'll use the chisel plow first, which rips furrows into the soil, loosening it. And then we follow up with a rototiller. So the rototiller is going to break those clods up and make a fine finished soil surface without too many passes. I guess that's the thing. It is associated with a lot of damage to the soil structure, though. So it's really critical that the soil conditions are just right. And that again comes down to experience. Mowing is a big part of farm management after the end of the season, as well as you've got lots of tools you're going to need to have to maintain your equipment. All right, so then you got the smaller tractors, and this is where we're going to be leaning towards today, and is really relevant for you as small farmers, more so probably than the large scale tractors. The thing about the smaller tractors is they're not so heavy, so they don't have such a negative impact on the deep soil structure. You're not causing so much compaction. They also fit in tight next to existing crops. So this introduces us now into a little bit more of the intensive hand labor that can be associated with small scale agriculture. So far, we've been talking about sort of field production. So we're talking about a flat field that you're going to use a tractor to till and then shape. Where this worker is standing, he's standing on the top of what we call our big garden beds. So these are permanent raised beds that we utilized the moldboard plow actually to, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's the black plastic bags down the middle between these two beds. So what we did when this was a flat field, and we drove the moldboard plow down this line, pushing the soil this way, and then coming back and pushing the soil that way. And then we did it again, pushing the soil a little bit more over and pushing the soil a little bit more over that way. In the end, it was pretty well shaped, but we ended up having to we used a backhoe actually to finish it. And the idea was to create a production area whereby the space between the beds was never going to be tilled again, never disturbed into the soil, thereby allowing the soil to do its thing, develop its microorganism community and maintain that community without disruption. The other thing was that it created the big garden bed as a real concentrated area for us to add amendments and to manage our practices. In this case, he's using a broad fork in the spring to loosen the soil in preparation for planting. Then we used, for the most part, especially in the beginning when the soil was still, pretty rough, we used a rototiller, a pretty standard piece of equipment. So the broad forking to loosen the soil, kind of like the chisel plow did, and then a small scale rototiller to break up the crumble, make a crumbly surface. It's always important to know what kind of soil you're dealing with. And again, this is where, like the Natural Resource Conservation Service, they have technical service providers who can assist you with understanding what you need to do as far as assessing your soil and assessing different issues that you need to do to amend your soil. This is a ATV pulling a fertilizer drop spreader. In our case, we're using organic materials to make leaf mulch and other organic material to make compost as a soil amendment. And then you got to spread the compost. So you got to, again, you're getting tied into all these different equipments. Hey, Eric?
Yes.
I really have to apologize. I just have to step aside. Can I just have you step in and field any questions, maybe?
Sure. Tess, can you help out there too?
Yeah, of course. No worries. So I see a question about insurance cost that I personally cannot answer, but we can bring that up to Mike when he comes back. Yeah. I just want to thank everybody again for your patience and ability to pivot as we kind of got booted off a couple of times and jumped back on. I definitely am still trying to figure out why that happened, but I'm grateful for everybody jumping back on.
Yeah, this has been a little bit of a wonky experience, right?
For sure.
But really appreciate Mike being here to do this.
Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, no problem. So Mike, before we jump back into it, there is a couple of questions. One, discussing the insurance cost jump.
Yep.
And then another seem to have a narrower spacing between some beds. Please discuss where and why you vary the spacing between permanent beds.
So the insurance, when I was looking at my numbers, there was a point where all of a sudden the insurance was like $10,000. That I think that might have been there may have been some problem in the representation of the facts. But we do carry a fair amount of insurance. I want to say it's, we're maybe paying $3,000 in insurance each year. Significant liability insurance. Workman's comp insurance goes up according to how many workers you have. The liability insurance is a big one. It's if you're going to get into farming and go to your farmer's market, you're going to be required to have liability insurance. And frankly, I feel like this is one of the biggest limitations to agriculture in New Jersey these days, is that landowners and people who are taking product to market become exposed to risk significantly by taking food to market. Somebody could get sick, they could sue you, and it's an exposure to risk that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. So insurance is a reality. It may not be a big item on the beginning farmer's thought process, but it's going to have to be part of your plan.
Mike, can I piggyback on that a little bit with, we had farmers at Sage that invested in an annual crop of sunflowers to get them started in their year 1, year 2, and just have some cut flower sales. And Ida wiped out their field. Do you recommend crop loss insurance? And that's sort of hard for a mixed vegetable. The crop loss insurance that I'm aware of was on specific crops, like very monocrop focused.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with crop insurance. My sense of it was, when we did look into it, the Farm Service Agency just kind of laughed at us, saying you're a small operation with vegetables. It's like, of course you're going to fail. Like, why would we insure that? So I think it is the crop insurance, and I shouldn't really speak to it much, but I would say that it's really focused on a large scale, very knowable crop like wheat or something like that, where the insurer has a very good understanding of like what to expect and what the risks are. Vegetables, I think, are pretty hard to insure, and so the farmer ends up building their own insurance into their system by having a diversified crop plan, whereby you've got 5 or 6 major crops that you're invested in, and you're sort of assuming that one's not going to work out and the other ones you hope do well. So you seem to have narrower spacing between some beds. The big garden beds, the permanent raised beds, we do have 2 different settings. One much wider than later developments of our permanent raised beds, where we started putting them together closer, because we found that we just were taking so much time mowing spaces between the beds, and it just wasn't that efficient. And that really just having some kind of strip between the production areas that aren't getting tilled, nature is so resilient that it just having that space that's not getting deep tilled was enough to preserve the soil community, the soil microorganisms. Okay. Federal crop insurance is based on your income for the prior year. So beginning farmers are at a distinct disadvantage without a history of production. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, so these are just some examples of some smaller scale. So this is the tractor, the yellow tractor is a 140, we refer to it, international harvester. And it's really where we moved to. What we would do is we would plow the whole field up, get it smooth and level and fine. And then we would use this tractor to start raising the beds, to shape the beds. And we would use the compost trailer that he's pulling to spread compost, or in this case, an ATV with a trailer, and just shoveling the compost off the back. Okay. This is probably more like what most of you are going to be looking at, with just doing a lot of hand labor. So in the process of weeding in the spring, we're spreading compost on the surface, sort of mixing, the tasks. Greenhouses there's no question that they're, very relevant part of our production concept anymore, especially in New Jersey, where for the most part, it's all about season extension. You can have production through the winter. We definitely have experienced that. And while the profitability per crop harvested goes down, the benefit of keeping your customers supplied through the winter is, can make all the difference between you maintaining your market share in the market and losing it to some other grower who will come in and fill that role. Clean the wagon out before you get another. Crop care. You got to get you have to have a plan for irrigation. If you're doing any kind of high value crops, any kind of vegetables, any kind of cut flowers, any kind of fruit, you have to plan on the fact that you're going to be irrigating. So that means you need to understand that system. And you also have to you're going to have to invest in the parts and supplies. The white fabric there is referred to commonly as remay. It's agricultural fleece. It's a lightweight material that will protect you from dramatic swings in temperature, also from insects and whatnot. Hand tools and seeders. And there's a couple different seeders there. We've got the standard sort of push. It's called a drill, and it's got the shank here that drags through the soil, and the seed drops down to the right depth. It's got a little chain that covers it over. This one, what the farmer over here is using is a pinpoint seeder. This is what we moved to for all our salad mix and carrots, radishes, any kind of small seeded crops. We found that this was the most economical way to get them seeded. The extra step it requires is that you need to roll or slightly compact the surface before you seed, and again after you seed, so you get good seed to soil contact. This red-handled planter is called a jab planter, and this is for seed, but they make them for seedlings too. where you jab the thing into the soil to the right depth, drop your seed in the top or your seedling. And then there's got a little mechanism whereby you lean forward and it opens the little thing. So it drops a seed in there. Shaping field beds, thinking about layout. So you can see the farmer here looking at the water at the ends of the beds. This is a very common trait where at the ends of the beds, you get a low spot and water will often collect there, and it can be a real problem. And so laying out your fields, laying out your beds so that you don't have this problem is a very critical step. And for us, what it often meant was that we had to decrease the size of our field that we anticipated being a certain size. Over years, we were like, you know what, it's such a hassle having water at the ends of our rows. If we just make that a permanent grass strip, that's the better way to handle it. And so we lose a little bit of total area, but we don't have moldy crops. We don't, sometimes you have a crop that grows well and then it get a couple weeks of rainy weather and it just all dies and it's lost anyway. All right. So one of the topics of this presentation today was regenerative systems. And regenerative systems are a high bar. Basically, I first came introduced to the term from learning about Rodell Institute, and where they were talking about, let's have agriculture that's more than sustainable. We don't just want our system to be sustainable. We want it to actually be, growing, regrowing, regenerative. And what I would strongly say is that organic management practices are clearly defined as being the method by which we achieve regenerative systems. Because it's only by fostering a healthy ecology that we will ever have that ecology be bounteous. Nature is amazing in its ability to recover. And that's kind of what we see in the agriculture that we've been predominantly relying on in society, is we go out there and we kill it. We spray it, we till it, we knock it back, we control it. We do everything we can to kind of kill the ecology so that then the space is available for us to grow our crop. And, once you start growing your crop and you see the insects and you see the diseases and you see the competition with weeds, you're like, I get this system. I understand why I'm killing all this ecology because I really want this crop to grow. But organic management practices say, look, we need to be able to grow these crops in some level of harmony with the ecology. And so that's kind of the basis behind the thinking behind regenerative systems, is that we want our agriculture to be developed in a way whereby the work that we do ends up with a situation where the nutrients and the vitality of life will still be there. So favorable furrows is what we've adopted to reduce deep tillage. So in the old days, to get a field going, we would plow the whole field, break it down until it was just bare soil, and then we would shape it up again, add compost, add our soil amendments, and plant our crops. In this case, what we found was, we're really when you do that, there's so much space between the crops. It's just bare soil that's getting beat up. Why do we need that? Why don't we just affect the area that we're going to plant into? And so you can see these furrows. It's the same that these guys are planting the tomatoes in. In the left picture where there's a lot of brown grass, basically we left a space between each of a full bed space between each bed that's untilled. And that gives you a whole lot of space where the ecology is really pretty undisturbed and is able to do its development, multi-generational development. And we're really only disturbing the stretch where we're planting the crop. The idea being that having the undisturbed ecology between the disturbed area, the regeneration of that disturbed area will occur quicker because you have available undisturbed soil in close proximity. These are, some examples of, small scale farming. Basically, you've got intensive planting of, these would be probably flowers that are being planted so tightly together. And that's going to require hand labor. And then over here on the right, we're planting peas real early in the season. And we just would have a hard time getting good germination. So we ended up, and we would soak the seeds. So the seeds were damp and sort of swollen when we're planting them. So it just ended up being easier to do by hand. And these are some of the hard choices that that the manager has to make to say, is this efficient? Is this worth the time that we're going to put into it? And in our case, planting peas, it was the first thing we were planting. Typically, you had a full crew that was sort of itching to be working anyway, so it made sense. It worked for us. Tools, hand tools for the small scale operation are really critical. You will quickly find the tools that you find to be most effective, and you will be encouraged to take good care of them. And then your workers, you can't get around the fact that for a small scale operation, your workers are so critical. They need to be happy to be at work. They need to be motivated. They need to be responsible. They need to be independent. And as a manager, you need to have work for them. And the operation needs to generate income so you can pay them. We don't use plastic mulch anymore. We use still plastic in our irrigation, but again, looking at the whole regenerative system, we're looking at, okay, well, regenerative, if we're going to use something in our agricultural production, if our goal is to develop a regenerative agricultural system, then we need to be able to regenerate the cost and impact of the products we use. And agricultural plastic there's been efforts to try to recycle it, but I have questions about the whole recycling system at all, much less plastic that's coated with dirt and mixed with debris. I don't think it's really being recycled. It's not being regenerated per se. But it's an amazing system, for the difference between growing strawberries on plastic mulch versus not having it. It could be the difference between having a crop and not having a crop. So using plastic mulch is really probably one of the driving factors in large-scale commercial agriculture, be they organic or conventional. It reduces hand labor. It dramatically improves the ability of the soil to retain moisture. And while it's cheap to produce, which it still has been, then it's an economical, choice compared to, having a skilled cultivator or laborers doing hand weeding. Very quickly, you turn that equation into an expensive product because it's recognized as being a, anyway, I won't go down that road. Cultivating the edges can be daunting. This is a good tool for that. Cultivating crops, as soon as you start getting onto a larger scale of production, your job becomes harder and harder. I'm going to start going a little quicker through these photos because I want to get you to the regenerative examples. These are, so wheel hoe, hand cultivating with the wheel. The power harrow next to this corn has been a really great addition to our production system, whereby this machine behind the walking tractor is really just disturbing the top of the soil rather than digging down into the soil. And the way it does that is just very effective and very light impact. So that's definitely a tool that the power harrow that we have adopted as a primary improvement in our cultivation. All these things need to be cleaned up at the end of the season. And then you get into sort of specialty production. So we've got poultry in pasture, which has its own management requirements. We've got high tunnel production. This has got cucumbers in there. We've got the field tomatoes. This dog laying here is on the side of the big garden bed. All towards getting that product to market. All right, so NOFA, Massachusetts, put together a conservation innovation grant to fund reduced tillage research. Basically, the biggest thing that we are talking about in modern agriculture is how do we reduce tillage? Because there's no way around the fact that soil health is, if you're talking about soil grown crops, soil health is the hardest thing to sustain and the easiest thing to disturb. And there's no way around the fact that we have to disturb the soil at some level to get our seeds to grow and our plants to grow. So you first have to start with an understanding of soil. And that's, where you do your soil testing, soil assessment. And again, as a small scale beginning farmer, this is a place to reach out for assistance. If you don't have any background in understanding your soil, this is the place that makes sense for you to reach out for assistance. Our production system relies on a mix of big garden beds, which are permanent established beds, and the field furrows. So we my introduction into agriculture was really, vegetables, specialty vegetables for fresh market sales. We ended up on the land that we are on mostly because of its affordability. And it was affordable because it is really pretty unsuitable to development. In our town, there's no city sewer. Everything is it has to be a septic system, and the land here is really unsuitable to septics. So it wasn't desirable for development. And frankly, it had been so abused over the years that it was kind of not that desirable for agriculture either. And so I've had a real hard time getting a viable agricultural system established, and probably having poor soil has been maybe the biggest limitation for our operation to be successful. Having said that, over the years of tending the soil using organic management practices, we have really brought it back to life. The problem is that there were generations of poor soil practices whereby the topsoil is lost. So we're working with a very thin topsoil, and below that we have a impermeable subsoil. So we have real trouble with wet conditions. So our way to make a cash income was to do really high value, quick growing crops, selling them direct and fresh to niche markets. But since then, now that our fields have gotten into a little bit better situation with their organic matter and nutrient levels and microbiology, we are doing some grains and some, experimenting with wheat. And so we do some field tillage. And what we're trying to do is just to do less of it. So the field tillage that we do is followed by a couple of years of no tillage. But for the niche crop production in the field, like Todd is here between green beans next to summer squash, these are not super high value crops. So putting them in the big garden beds where we really want our highest value crops is not that beneficial to us. We still want to produce them in the field. And so the field furrows have worked for us. The key here being that we're tilling this narrow strip and we're not tilling the strip between the tilled land. This is a picture of plastic covering a big garden bed. The term is referred to as solarization. So basically when the conditions are right, which the outside air temperature needs to be like 70 degrees or above generally. So it's too early to effectively do this now at this time of year. But during the summer, we can cover a bed with this plastic securely, and in a day or 2 days, it burns off all the surface vegetation. And this is a case where we can almost scatter seed here on the surface and get the crop to grow. It was really hard for me to adopt this practice because I was used to direct seeding my carrots into a really fine, beautiful, crumbly soil. And I've not gotten to the point where I've scattered seed yet through this debris. Typically what I'm still doing is I will go over this surface area with a weed whacker to, pretty quickly be able to, chop through any extra debris and shoot it to the side. And then we're still dragging our pinpoint seeder through that. But it's working great. And we end up having carrot beds that we really don't need to weed. Because again, as a beginning farmer, what you want to understand is every time you till the soil, you're bringing up weed seeds from deeper down. That, you know, a weed seed can exist from 10 to 30 years in the soil sometimes, as well as different fungal bacterias. But they might not be triggered to germinate or to propagate because they're too deep in the soil. So when you churn that soil up and you bring them to the surface, that's when, you know, you sort of repopulate your bed with these weeds when you thought the bed looked really clean. So by not tilling, by just using the solarization, we're able to prepare a bed for planting without triggering the growth of dormant weed seeds. That being said, in the spring, we still need to do some tillage because it's just not warm enough to make that happen. So we will do some hand forking and rototilling to get the beds ready at the beginning of the season. This is the harrow. So it's still, when you're looking at this bed on the left behind the harrow, you still see a lot of greenery. So that greenery will all die in a day or two. If you don't, you know, so this is again where you learn, you know, I'm not going to do my power harrowing right before rain, because if I power harrow right before rain, the rain comes, a lot of that greenery will be reestablished. But as it is right now, it's been ripped where the roots have been separated from the greenery and it will just die off. That is an example of a bed that has been rototilled, and you can see how, you know, that's what you want to seed into, right? It's just so fine and soft and beautiful, but turns out it's not necessary. We rely on our big garden beds for our high value crops. So the salad mix, you know, interestingly, carrots are an interesting crop where they are in the marketplace, they are really pretty cheap when you look at, you know, the cost for a 5-pound bag of carrots. But as a niche marketer, if I can bring a really sweet, tender, fresh carrot to my customer, they'll pay much more than they would for, you know, a 5-pound bag of carrots in the store that they, you know, they're not sure whether they're going to be good this time around or not. So in our case, they are a high value crop, even though commercially on a large scale, they might not be considered that high value a crop. We can talk more if we have questions about implementing the favorable furrows. We can talk more about that after, when we get into the question and answer. And are we done at, is 11:30 we done, or do we have longer than that?
I think we have until about 12. So you can just go as long as you need, and then we can maybe take some questions.
So, okay, so sort of trying to wrap up on the field layout, the use of the favorable furrows in the field. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The permanent raised beds, when I was describing that the space between the tilled beds is left undisturbed, that the benefit of that is that the soil microorganisms are undisturbed so that they're able to develop their resilient community. And our belief is that, and actually, when I got into organic agriculture, it was really just kind of a belief. It was like, we believe that having organic matter in the soil is good for the soil. And we have observed that, you know, soil that has organic matter in it is, you know, handles heavy rains and periods of drought more beneficially than, or not less, you know, that has low organic matter content doesn't do as well in those settings as soil that has high organic matter content, which can handle heavy rain and, or periods of drought. Since then, there's more and more science has been put into, paid attention to this, where it's, I'll try to get us to a link on the website, on my website, but actually if you go to NOFA Massachusetts website too and look up, well, we'll find the link, but basically we're understanding that the carbon, and people have heard about carbon sequestration, where the soil organisms are breathing and they're capturing carbon. And my, sort of layperson's understanding of it is that the mycology within the soil is actually is able to use this carbon to create structure within the soil. There's a term, glomalin, has been identified as it's sort of like the glue that is exuded by these microorganisms that helps the soil particles hold structure. And that soil structure is what is so critical to a healthy soil. When you disturb the soil and you turn it over and you till it up, natural processes, sort of, we refer to it as sort of burning through that organic matter and burning up that carbon, and it's getting released to the atmosphere. Different sorts of microorganisms are stimulated to consume it, and it's kind of lost. So reducing tillage is all about trying to reduce that loss. In the favorable furrow methods that we use, what we are doing cultivation between the crops that we grow. So, but we're not doing deep tillage. So once we establish the crop in the furrow and it's growing, then we start cultivating on either side of that crop. And we use the power harrow for that, which just disturbs the top, say, ½ inch of the soil, which is enough to rip a grass from its root and, set the grass back. Sometimes it'll sprout again. So we tend to do 2 cultivations each crop. And after that second cultivation, we sprinkle a mix of clover and some nurse grain crop like wheat or oats or something. Because the other piece of healthy soil that a farmer has to be responsible for if they want to be improving and protecting their soil is to establish living plants in the soil. So what our process is basically, as a farmer trying to produce a crop, we're coming in, we're causing disturbance, but we're trying to reduce our disturbance to a single furrow where we're going to plant our crop. And then we're can't help but disturbing around the crop because we want to fight the competing weeds and things like that. But what we've determined is if we time it properly, we can add beneficial plant species which will quickly get established and connect to the microbiome in the soil, re-establishing those relationships. And that's where we're talking about regeneration. We're talking about disturbance followed by regeneration of the beneficial qualities of a healthy soil. Cover crop is so important. You can't talk about agriculture in these modern days with any regard for soil health without planning for cover cropping. And that's a subject we could take an hour just to talk about that. One thing that is an interesting thing, if this might be new to you, is the concept of winter kill cover crops. So here's a case where in the fall, after the beds were done producing a crop, or in this case, I think we were planning on preparing beds for the following season. So in that fall, we established barley, which will quote unquote winter kill. And then the brown, so the green photo on the left is one barley, and then the photo on the right is after the winter, that is all died back. And it's created protection for the soil, but it's also sort of expired. So it'll be easier for us to get into that soil in the spring. We'll just mow that off pretty quick and be able to cut our furrow in there. Again, the importance of cover cropping. You know, when you see a healthy cover crop in a field, you just know in your heart that that's right. When we talk about traditional agriculture, there's the concept of having a fallow field. And this is one of the reasons why whenever I've advised any kind of operation towards, you know, how much land they need, I always say you need, you know, enough land that half of it or some portion of it anyway can be fallow. Because if you're just doing production after production after production after production, it's hard to develop that regenerative system. Whereas if you have a period of fallow, then you have a little bit more of an opportunity to have the ecology have a chance to regenerate itself. Napa cabbage and radishes. This is just an example again, first beginning in small scale farmers thinking about the how do you make best use of your space. So these big garden beds are highly costly for us to manage because they require a lot of hand labor. But if you're going to be putting that hand labor in anyway, then that's the place to have complicated systems. So we have radishes on the edge of the bed because the radishes will grow quicker than the cabbage, and we'll harvest them as the cabbage is getting big, and then the cabbage will be left for a longer period of time using up that space where the radishes were taken away from. This is a nice photo of the garlic showing, you know, just the vigor of the ecology here. So having this vigorous ecology between the rows of garlic, not only is it protecting the soil, but I believe that it is stimulating the soil towards biological activity. And, you know, there's a fine line at some point that biological activity can be competing for nutrients and moisture for your crops. You know, and then the other thing that I haven't resolved is the tool that we use. You know, we're using walk behind mowers and things like that for managing these space, and they have very poor pollution control mechanisms. It does seem like the ability to do electric tools might, you know, address this problem a little bit, but it is an unresolved problem. Again, just some of the different tools that we use. This is a billy goat mower. I highly recommend it for a small scale operator. It just handles tall debris really well, very manageable. The BCS is a more expensive equipment or tool, but it's very versatile. You can use the different, you can change your different implements. So this has got a flail mower on it now. It's the same tractor that we would use for the power harrow. Maybe we should take a minute for any questions before I go into some crop selections that we've done. We've not got too much in the chat, but and I don't know whether is it possible for folks to be able to speak up, or is it
I think
too complicated?
if anyone wants to raise their hand if they have a specific question, I can unmute you to ask it live. But I do see, and I apologize if you answered this a little while back, but I do see a question about if you have a suggestion for an ideal spacing between beds, or if that kind of depends on the crops.
Yeah, so the ideal spacing between beds is really a function of your equipment that you're using to manage your fields with. Like, so what we when we first set our big garden beds up, we set it up with enough space between the beds that we could do a single pass down between them with our tractor and our specific mower disc or brush hog. And then we changed that to, because the beds became hard to get the tractor down there as they got wider and wider over time. So we changed our spacing to much narrower, we just rely on our walk behind tractors. So I'll jump right into two crops. So two of the crops that we talked about that we're going to present in this presentation. One is hemp and one is hazelnuts. So we are getting down on time. So I'll go through them pretty quick.
Real quick, Mike, there was one more question about what implement is used to make the favorable furrows.
Okay. So implement for the favorable furrows. Let's just go. I'll show. Oh, you know what? If I could ask the person to go to northslopefarm.com, and then in the search window, just plug in favorable furrows, and you'll find some links to that. But we can come back to it too.
Great, thanks. I dropped the North Slope Farm website in the chat, and I recall you wanted to share another resource, so I can put that in the chat as well, if you just remind me what that was.
What the other was. All right, so hemp. All right, so profitability, we've talked about that being an issue and a challenge. And so a new crop that comes along is always going to have opportunity. Hemp is a thing that's it's been around now for a bunch of years, although not that popularized. And, you know, the market for it is still sort of not that clearly defined. But it is allowed, it's protected by Right to Farm, the Right to Farm Act, and you're allowed to do it as a farm without risking your farmland assessment. As opposed to cannabis, which is the same plant as hemp, but has THC in it. And the New Jersey state law regarding cannabis clearly states that it's not protected by Right to Farm, which is a function of the federal government hasn't legalized it yet. And the other thing that's causing a lot of confusion for people is that the cannabis cannot be grown on land that is farmland assessed. And like I say, it's causing a lot of confusion, but it really shouldn't be causing confusion. The entities that are supposed to be directing and supporting agriculture in New Jersey really need to get their act together and make clear statements about this. But mostly farmland assessment is not allowed for land where cannabis is being grown, just such that anybody that's growing cannabis is paying the maximum amount of taxes that they can. That's really what that's about. It's not got anything to do with whether cannabis is agriculture or not. It's got everything to do with whether the government is getting as much tax as they can. So we have actually been North Slope Farm, well, I personally have, with some partners, applied for a state license to grow cannabis, and we've gotten our conditional approval for that. But it's conditional on approval from our town, and our town has, it's not really that clear, but they've been really aggressively dissuasive of us. It's been disheartening, quite honestly. For 2 years now, they have made it impossible for us to move forward in this incredibly potentially beneficial agricultural crop. So we shifted a little bit and have been growing hemp because that is allowed and the town can't stop us. So here's our story about hemp. What you have to apply for a permit, you apply to the Department of Agriculture, and they have a whole lot of forms you have to fill out throughout the season, not least of which is that you have to define clearly where you're going to do it. And then here's an example of our regenerative systems in practice. So you see this strip of brown soil, that was a favorable furrow. And, you know, in preparation for planting. And then there's an untilled bed between each bed. Here is hemp that has been direct seeded, and you can see that it's pretty weedy. And if I planted corn like that, I would be like, I'm not going to get much of a corn crop. I'm going to have to hand weed that corn, which is not desirable. The hemp grew right out of it. It was amazing. But so last year was our first year doing it, so we were trialing. So we trialed direct seeded and transplanted. So we took these transplants and we put them in the row. So you see this, you've got this nice 6-inch plant and no weeds yet. This is a picture of what our favorable furrow bed could be. The density could have been with the hemp if we direct seeded 4 rows instead of just a single row, which is what we'll do this year. It grew really well. Let's see this, what does this say? Seeded in late May. We had the seed crop by September, which is not bad timing. You can see here, this was the stuff that was transplanted. So much less weed pressure than over here, which was direct seeded. But you can kind of see the thick stalks. So even with that heavy weed pressure, they still grew up and produced a seed crop. For our purposes, we harvested a single row to get our a yield estimate. And so last night when I was looking at this, I was like, all right, so 700 pounds per acre is about what the sort of conventional expectation is. From direct seed, well, from planting that one row, if we extrapolated that row out over an acre, I felt like we were looking at more like more than 1,000 pounds per acre. So I thought that was interesting. The challenge with it is it's real sticky. So to get to harvest it is a challenge. What we did on a small scale was harvested it by hand, and then we dried it in our hoop house before we processed it. And once we did that, we had a pretty good, easy time getting a real nice crop from it. We were looking at it mostly for chickens, for feed. So for livestock feed, basically, because that's one of the greatest challenges for farmers, organic farmers these days in New Jersey, is there's just really no organic feed available. So doing it yourself is kind of the key. Even when it was weedy, what we did was we used a chopper and we chopped it in a bulk form and just tossed it right into the chickens. Prior to harvest, you have to sample it to be sure there's no THC, because if there's THC in it, they won't let you harvest it. We also grew the CBD flower, but we didn't have much luck with that. We just, it was a function of our management. We're going to try that again this year, see if we started earlier, we'd do better. It really breaks down when you're trimming it down to get to the prime product. A lot of that stuff has to get trimmed off. We're just going to quick jump to hazelnuts. So hazelnuts are again, another crop that has real potential for us in New Jersey. Rutgers has developed varieties that are resistant to filbert blight, eastern filbert blight. And that's critical. So we've seen hazelnut fields that were planted with hazelnuts that were purchased from Oregon or even Michigan and stuff like that. And they just don't, they're highly likely to fail. So having variety stock that is going to be resistant to eastern filbert blight is critical. And Rutgers has developed some varieties which are still very much in the trial phase. Foggy Bottom Farms is the nursery that they're available from now. This map, pollinator planting. To grow the hazelnuts, you have to have pollinator varieties which are has genetic diversity around the outer edge. So each row here, these would be rows going across the field, have 4 pollinators at the end of each row, and then 1 whole row of pollinators on either side. In our case, we're planting on a slope, so we had to start by laying out contoured beds. The first round of planting, we were putting in right into sod, so we used a soil auger to cut through the sod to make so we weren't digging through the sod by hand. Since then, we've been using, just more pre-planting and making a little pile of compost where we're going to plant the plant for the winter so that it kills the sod. And then the crop care includes mulching, weeding, mowing, irrigation. And that's, I think those guys are probably 3 or 4 years old. This is at the Rutgers field trial. All right, so that's a lot. I'm gonna stop sharing. If we can get into allow for any questions.
Thanks so much, Mike. I do see a question asking what CBD flower is used for.
That's something that I've been trying to figure out too. So THC in cannabis is the quality that's associated with like euphoria. People will say that they feel more, relaxed when they have that effect. There is some question that the CBD might give you that same relaxation without the euphoria, without the, getting high, quote unquote. So a CBD product is being, explored as an option for somebody to have a medical benefit from consuming the herb without the, disorganized thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, like I believe the CBD flower without the THC, it kind of gives you those relaxed qualities without like the psychoactive component, correct?
Yeah. And so we've been experimenting with that a little bit, just as far as whether there is an effect. And it wasn't really just because as selling the product, I sort of feel like I need to, like when I sell a herb tea, if I can say to the customer, yeah, I take this lemon verbena before going to bed and I, sleep better. It's the same kind of thing. So we've been experimenting to see if there's any appreciable effect. And I feel like there is. I feel like, I've tried smoking it, but the edibles are a factor where you extract the molecules from the plant and combine it with some kind of consumable edible to get the effect.
So the molecules that you're extracting from the plant, does that come directly from the plant or is it only from the flowers? Or both?
Well, it's typically concentrated in the flowers.
Okay.
And our experience actually though with the CBD flower that we grew this past fall was we didn't get great flower development, but the plant was covered with crystals. And our test was high for CBD qualities. So the plant, I think the plant decided that it wasn't going to be able to develop a whole lot of flowers, so it just ended up pushing out its little crystals. Stephanie, okay, describe the harvesting of hazelnuts and where's the market? So right now the market is very much sort of a dream of potential. Apparently, the hazelnut crop is all bought already on the global market and there's need for more. That's what Rutgers says. The harvest strategy is the way these plants are intended is they'll drop the nuts to the ground and then you suck them up like you would with a leaf vacuum. And then you have to sort them and clean them. And then you got your crop.
Wow.
Yeah,
and
Rutgers, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to ask, they're like a typical, obviously like a fruit and nut tree that takes multiple years to produce the fruit. How many years typically?
5 years typically.
Okay.
So ours are probably in about their third year. And the sense is that after the third year is when they really kick off and really start growing. That for the first 3 years, they're pretty small. You don't see a lot of growth, but I guess what's happening is the subsoil growth is happening.
That's great.
I would say that I encourage anybody that has further questions to email me. I'm happy to, to respond to specific questions. And our email is on our website. So if you go to northslopefarm.com, you'll find our email. And happy to respond to that.
Yeah, I just dropped your email in the chat there, and I'll follow up with everyone with links to North Slope Farm, the NOFA NJ resource library, as well as the Foggy Bottom Farm hazelnut resource,
Nursery,
and Mike's email, of course, if anyone has any further questions. Thanks so much for doing this with us, Mike. I know I learned a lot.
That was great. I really
appreciate that.
appreciate the time. And I really had a great appreciation for you. It feels like you're really giving back and helping other farmers, and that's so important. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Sorry, I was jumping around a lot. There's a lot of information. So sorry if I went through some things too quickly.
No, not at all. I really appreciate it. And we'll also share the recording. And again, apologies for the technical difficulties. So the recording might have a couple jumps in it.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for attending and hanging around with us. So definitely, if anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us at Food Shed or Mike at North Slope Farm. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.